Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. This is on artificial intelligence entitled, Can We Remove the Human Out of Human Resources? I'm Andrew Macaulay Ferguson.
And I'm Ashley Healy.
And we're from Heatherton Solicitors, and we're going to be taking you through our seminar today. So, general background to artificial intelligence. One of the most rapidly expanding sectors of the 21st century is that of AI. So as you can see from the information provided on this slide, an AI sector study has found that there are over 5,800 companies that specifically specialize in AI in 2024. The UK government have stated that the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology estimate that around 62% of their routine tasks that could be undertaken by junior civil servants could now be taken out by AI instead. And a further government study has shown that 1 in 6 UK organisations already use at least one form of AI technology, and that is likely to increase. In terms of where the UK sits in terms of other countries and their uptake of AI tools and their usage, a survey of 80,000 workers from 8 countries, of which the UK was one, showed that 41% of UK workers say they are using artificial intelligence at work. And the survey also came to show that employers that actively encourage their staff to use AI were more likely to have staff adopting the use of AI. And all of the links for those relevant studies are linked in the slideshow, which will be provided after today's seminar if you would like to read those. So I guess the most important question is what is artificial intelligence? So AI is made up of 2 key elements. First of that is data. This could be text, this could be audio, this could be images and video, and then algorithms that use that data. So an algorithm is simply a form of computer code that is given instructions to undertake certain tasks. So AI really is just very advanced computer software that is given programming commands to follow certain algorithms to do the following. So it could be used to recognize patterns. For example, it could be used to determine which products are selling the most and plot out a graph to detail that. It could reach conclusions for you, for example, summarizing key points of a document. Those of you that are familiar with Microsoft Copilot will be aware that one of the key tools that Copilot offers is that it will summarize items for you, and I believe Adobe has something similar. AI can also make informed judgments for you based on the information it has reviewed, and it can be used to predict future behavior and automate repetitive functions. Now, there are many applications that use AI, but some of the most commonly used are ChatGPT, various chatbots, analysis tools, and virtual assistants. So how does AI work and how does it develop? So there are 3 main types of artificial intelligence, and they all learn in slightly different ways. So the first type is machine learning. This is where AI is trained, as it were, to learn and improve on its processing by being given more trends, more patterns, and more data to therefore make greater predictions with a higher accuracy rate. What is important to know about machine learning is that these are only predictions and these are only based on data. Therefore, there is always room for error because there is never going to be a 100% success rate. A very common use is generative AI. This is often condensed to Gen AI. This generates new content based on data. So a very common example of this is ChatGPT, text generation using a model of language. So it uses algorithms to handle language. It will then predict word sequences and it will give you answers. So this could be creating formal messages for emails. This could be something far more colloquial. The range of language that it is using is quite vast. It can also be used to summarize information and give intelligent human-esque answers to questions. Common prompts people give to ChatGPT is, what could I do with X? What could I do with Y? ChatGPT will then go through its database and it will provide you an answer based on the information that has already been fed. And then the third type of artificial intelligence is agentic AI. This is autonomous AI. So this is where it would follow several steps in a process with no human intervention required. So an example of this could be an AI tool that creates a website. So there are a set of steps it follows out. The algorithm will tell it to do one thing followed by another. And once it has developed that item, for example, in the creation of a website, it would identify the important pages on the website and simulate user interactions. So if you are a client who has an online store or wants to create your online presence, this would be a fantastic way of working out what an everyday person's interaction with your website could look like without having to have the risk of creating a website and waiting for a real person to reach your site.
Right, so what is the current legal and political framework? The Labour government stated that they will work with businesses, trade unions, and experts to determine what AI and other technological developments mean for work, for jobs, and for skills. This includes a focus on best practice in safeguarding, given the documented concerns of threats to privacy via surveillance technology, spyware, and discriminatory algorithmic decision making. As a baseline standard, all proposals to introduce surveillance technologies will be subject to consultation and negotiation. Ideally, this will lead to an agreement with trade unions or elected staff representatives, or in smaller businesses where there isn't any trade union or even elected staff representatives, with the actual staff themselves. Obviously, this will be subject to any existing terms of any pre-existing collective agreement, if there is one in place. The Labour manifesto promised the creation of a Regulatory Innovation Office, which was established in October 2024. One of them, the main concern is that regulators do not have the necessary resources or understanding as to how to deal with extreme technological advances. So regulations need to be introduced to ensure AI models are being developed and adopted safely. One of the issues of that being that the technology moves much quicker than government does. And so often by the time something's put in place, the technology has moved on to something else and another issue has cropped up.
So how can AI be used in the workplace? Now, we're going to go through a number of different examples, and these are not limited to staff use. So some of these are examples of AI tools that can be used with customers and suppliers. The purpose of this seminar is just to look at some of those examples, and obviously, we would inquire you to do your own research if any of these things sound like they could be of use to your business. So the first of all, we have our predictive analytics. So these are examples of HR software tools which can predict which job applicants are most likely to be high performers based on the existing data within their personnel files and the same, and then they could be selected for interview or promotion. There is obviously some slight risks with that, but more on that later. AI can now also automate repetitive tasks in the workplace. Key examples of this is that it could be undertaking data entry, for example, completing spreadsheets, or scheduling shifts. This can massively improve your employee productivity by reducing workload and freeing staff up to undertake other tasks, especially if those tasks in question would be far more time consuming for a human to undertake compared to an artificial intelligence tool. Another incredibly common use is a chatbot. Those of you who are familiar with large retailers will have probably come across these, as most banks and utility providers do have chatbots on their websites. These reduce time spent speaking to customers over the phone or email, and the chatbot can be the first port of call for customers online, and then all initial inquiries can therefore be processed by the virtual conversation. The idea with chatbots is obviously that this reduces the flow of calls that go to the call centers or to the client directly, and the chatbot itself, whilst having been fed a variety of questions, can then develop over time to understand what might be frequently asked questions that somebody might want to understand through the website that doesn't need to then be passed on to a human telephone advisor. AI can also be used for data analysis and insights. So as explained earlier, AI is very data-driven. So one of the tools it can be used for is extracting patterns from data having undertaken a thorough analysis. This can be incredibly useful for your business if you want to undertake sales forecasting, predicting your market research, or any form of fraud detection. Another incredibly common use is personalization, which for anyone who has used online retail, such as Amazon, will be familiar with. The algorithms will analyze your user behavior and preferences based on contact you have interacted with, and then it will tailor recommendations to you based on products they think that might be interested to you. This is also seen on streaming services. For example, if you liked buying this product, we think you might also be interested in this other product, which is a fantastic way of generating upselling for your business.
Right, other examples of AI uses in the workplace, in capability and disciplinary issues. AI tools may be used by employers to decide which employees to performance manage or discipline. Tools are only as beneficial and impartial as the data that they are fed. Human intervention is likely to remain a key, and employees may distrust managers who use AI to make decisions on nuanced matters. So the data might give you certain information, but a human may need to look at that to see whether there's anything in there which could be discriminatory or other sort of issues. Screen time tracking. AI tools can be used to track and monitor workers, typically used for remote workers, but not always, but typically used. AI will usually monitor a combination of factors such as keystrokes, seeing how often the worker is typing, video recording, showing when they are working, and time recording by monitoring time spent inputting data into a document. These are then synchronized to give a clear pattern of the person's working day. These integrations can be undertaken without any human involvement and can detect to a detail that would not be possible for a human to do unless they were solely monitoring staff output. This can help identify which staff are working efficiently and also those who are not. And performance trends will also show which staff are overworking and at risk of burnout. Whilst ensuring that productivity is up is important, staff may be reluctant to work for a company where they feel they're being routinely surveyed and use such tools that may breed distrust and discontent.
So what are the benefits of using artificial intelligence? So one of the key factors, as I have previously outlined, is that AI can increase your productivity. By removing work from paid staff to effectively outsource it to software, this does cut costs for manual work and it can improve efficiency and reduce human error. The downside to this, obviously, is it does introduce the concept of a computer error, though that is something that, unfortunately, there is never going to be a 100% accuracy rate. It can also streamline your operations. So, for example, if you work in manufacturing, you can use AI to predict machinery failures and therefore reduce the downtimes and associated maintenance costs with the same. If you are a business that rely on online retail, you can use AI to personalize your customer experiences. So targeted adverts and tailored product recommendations can increase your customer loyalty and encourage a customer to want to continue to make purchases with yourselves. It can also improve your employee experience. Automated jobs can be incredibly time consuming, and removing them from task lists for staff members and delegating them to a piece of software instead does give that employee more time to undertake more creative tasks and collaborative work that simply just at this stage in time cannot be undertaken by artificial intelligence. AI is also very useful in terms of decision making. Because it is solely data driven, it can just use its existing data to predict things. So, for example, if you wanted to determine the most favorable time period to undertake a certain task, e.g., if you needed to market a certain product and you wanted to work out what the optimal times were to run certain targeted adverts based on the highest volume of traffic to your website, you would be able to find tools that would be able to help you with that. Now, what are the problems with artificial intelligence? So one of the key problems that has arisen, and this is more specifically in relation to generative AI, is the problem of hallucination. Now, hallucination is when AI generates inaccurate or often completely fictitious information and it is presented as fact. Now, there are a number of cases from 2025, and the first one I'm going to refer to here is Haringey from 2025, in which the claimant's grounds for review contained a reference to a case that simply did not exist. There was a misattribution of an existing case citation to a completely fictitious one, and a misstatement in relation to the Housing Act. And all of these problems arose due to incorrect usage of AI tools. Now, in this particular case, it became obvious to the judge presiding over the matter that this fictitious case clearly didn't exist, when no authority could be provided to show that a case of the names that were referred to had actually ever been heard. However, the problem with this is that this arose because there was a lack of human input to determine whether that case did exist. Had this been spotted by the claimant sometime before this matter got before a judge, then it would have been easy to identify that this case simply didn't exist and the precedent being referred to was not one that could be referred to because it didn't actually happen. What does this mean for us going forward? If there is a margin for error because AI does not have human input, then how could this affect technology going forward? Now, these examples I have referred to are to do with case law, but this is not the only example where AI can hallucinate things. There are examples if you sometimes ask search engines that are optimized with artificial intelligence, you might be given an AI summary of examples. The problem being that it will pull from a multitude of sources and can sometimes collate the information together in a wrong way, in that it's not actually understanding what it's putting together, and it can present a multitude of different information together as fact. So this is quite concerning. Hopefully, with the developments with AI, hallucination will be less of a risk and it will be less of an occurrence. However, it is still a very widely known problem.
Another potential problem with AI are ethical concerns that have been raised. AI is used for recruitment uses algorithms to select applicants who are a good fit. The algorithm's data will likely be a previous candidate data. So if a company has a lack of diversity, then the algorithm for identifying good fit candidates will simply replicate that. This was seen in 2018 when recruitment algorithm for Amazon had been cancelled after it consistently favoured male candidates over female candidates due to the human biases utilised by the algorithm. And again, if you've got a workforce that is predominantly white or predominantly male, then AI, and that is your favoured ideal candidate or more suitable candidate, then AI will just generate more of the same. There's a growing concern of AI's impact on climate change. Most AI deployments are contained within data centers. These need a considerable amount of electricity to run, plus the raw materials required to create the data centers themselves and the volume of water required to cool them down to prevent overheating. And where there's been planning permissions being put in for these data centres in the UK, that's one of the concerns that is being raised to object to them. Because AI relies on data, it is devoid of compassion, empathy, and intuition. There are certain roles, tasks, and conversations that are better suited to human interactions, where compassion and understanding can be conveyed in a way that a computer system could not. Counselling, customer services, and any work involving vulnerable people should remain untouched by AI, as the nuances of such matters are unlikely to be understood by AI.
Unfortunately, we have some further ethical concerns with AI, and one of those is of job displacement. As software will begin to take over traditionally human tasks, this does put certain industries and definitely certain roles risk of being rendered completely obsolete. If there is a role that requires repetitive tasks, for example, a solely data entry-based role, or a role that is data-driven, this is quite relevant to manufacturing and logistics type roles, then this does put a lot of potential jobs at risk of being replaced by AI. There is obviously a counterpoint to this. The employees in question could simply receive training on AI to broaden their understanding, broaden their skill sets, but this is only likely to be beneficial in certain areas and sectors. Some of the points in which AI tools are marketed is not so that staff can be better trained, but so that staff can be replaced. The idea being that the tool will take over the work from the human, and the tool will therefore free up time for other people. This is therefore obviously a quite clear knock-on consequence of taking on a piece of software to undertake a traditionally human role. Now, I outlined at the beginning of the presentation that we have nearly 6,000 AI companies within the UK at this moment in time. If that number continues to grow, then obviously there is still going to be work within the artificial intelligence sector. But this early on, it is too early to say if transitioning into these roles will be smooth or whether there will be additional training and qualifications needed to facilitate the same. This will quite clearly create a skills gap between the workers who will have their roles replaced by AI tools and not have the training to develop and retrain, and those that work in areas that are more highly qualified and that the tools are seen as an advantage, which leads nicely into my second point about socioeconomic inequality. So more qualified workers with technical expertise in AI-related fields are more likely to be deemed desirable by employers. Those without are less likely to find work because automated roles are simply likely to be replaced by AI tools as businesses look to reduce costs and improve efficiency across the business. This will further create a greater divide and economic inequality between workforces, which is clearly not ideal. Another potential issue is complacency. If an individual becomes over-reliant on AI, and too much trust is placed in software, then there is a lack in critical thinking and a lack of time spent on making intelligent and informed decisions. If you are simply inputting questions to a computer and using the computer to make those calls for you, then you are not necessarily developing and training. So there is a fine line between relying on tools to support you as a member of staff and potentially over-relying on that.
So, how do we solve a problem like AI? We can turn to our old friend risk assessments. Risk assessment could identify the risks of using it and an AI tool for the intended purpose. So it's important to consider the categories of persons impacted. So, for example, employees, customers, suppliers, so any other sort of stakeholders in the business. The geographic scope, the unintended consequences. But again, we're talking about bias and potential discrimination. So what may those be? Deliberate actions such as intentional misuse by an employee. So consider the potential legal implications of the risks. For example, tribunal claims, data protection breaches, etc. Consider the likelihood of the identified risks. Are they acceptable risks to take in order to use the AI tool? So it's a risk assessment, so it's a balancing act. Prioritize the identified risks that must be addressed before the AI tool can be deployed. And a red, amber, green matrix may help to achieve this. Also in the risk assessment, whether it's a health and safety or an AI one, is mitigate. What do you do to mitigate that risk? So consider how to mitigate any unacceptable identified risks. Examples of mitigation could include a human review of the output of the AI tool. So make sure you have a person look at it. Again, we talked about before about potential discriminatory information that may come out. Using accessibility software, using an alternative manual process for persons with certain protected characteristics, training and guidance for users of the AI tool. That's probably a key mitigating factor, and enabling users to provide feedback. Review the process to assess if mitigations address the risks. Record all identified risks and mitigations. So ongoing monitoring and evaluation, which again is the same for many other sort of processes, whether it's health and safety or whatever, then that ongoing monitoring and evaluation is important. So monitor and evaluate the feedback process and output of the AI tool, and this will help to ensure the mitigations are working and identify any unanticipated which can then be alleviated.
How else can we potentially combat these problems? Now, as an employment lawyer, I love suggesting policies, and this example is no exception. So some of you may already have a generative AI in the workplace policy. If not, I strongly recommend having one. So the purpose of this is outlining the permissions for use of publicly available generative AI platforms. This is not mandatory use of AI to undertake your work. This is to deal with any existing platform. So for example, the majority of businesses will have Microsoft. So it is highly likely that you will have Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is Microsoft's snazzy little assistant who can help you out with summarizing documents and all manner of things. Now, if there's any other technology you might have acquired, then that would also be an example. Now, again, this policy will depend entirely on the sector in which you work and the level and maturity of the generative AI that you are using. The policy should be tailored accordingly. If your only input in terms of work is that you allow staff to use ChatGPT, then the policy will probably be quite short. If there are a multitude of pieces of software, then you should have a list in this policy of the software that is being used, the purposes in which they're being used for, and the examples of things that they are not meant to be used for. I would also suggest that all of these policies are drafted and finalized with input from IT security team as well as from your data protection officer, because you need to still ensure that you're complying with UK GDPR and protecting personal data, especially sensitive personal data when dealing with AI tools. There's only so much that we can advise on in terms of legal and HR risks, and it's always useful to have a technological point of view come across as well. If you want to have AI tools used during the working relationship, so for example, if you wanted to have keystroke monitoring used so that you could, for a line manager to monitor their staff that worked remotely, or you wanted to use any form of AI tool to facilitate and assist the undertaking of certain roles and job duties, then I would suggest you have a code of conduct for AI in the employment relationship. This is in effect a value statement. So this issues of AI in recruitment and appraisal. For example, Ashley spoke earlier about the reference to using AI for disciplinaries and capabilities. If you as an employer wanted to have a tool in there that would maybe review somebody's performance targets and use the AI tool to help give you some feedback on that, it would be a very wise decision to have that referred to in this value statement so that staff are aware that there will be involvement from AI and not everything that will be happening in terms of the working relationship is solely human based. This transparency obviously allows the employees to make informed decisions to understand if they have any issues with that or if they have any concerns, then they can be raised directly. It's important to be transparent if you are going to use artificial intelligence, because it could obviously breed some levels of contempt or distrust in staff, and in maintaining employee relationships and maintaining employee relations generally across a business is quite hard work. So transparency and honesty is incredibly important here. It's also useful, if you're going to have a value statement as part of this code of conduct, to consider your environmental, social, or governance policies and how that would maybe fit alongside your existing risk governance policies to ensure you adhere to them. Corporate social responsibility, very big buzzwords, very useful and worth seeing how that potentially fits in, especially if you have values that align with potentially more environmental concerns. So I touched on the issues of data protection. Now, what we do need to consider if we're looking at use of AI tools is how this tool, if you were to use it, or tools, plural, if you're adopting multiple, will process personal data, and how you as an employer can ensure that you are complying with the data protection principles under the UK GDPR. As a quick recap, personal data must be used lawfully, fairly, and it must be transparently used. There must be mindful of the purpose limitation, i.e. personal data can only be used for the specific purposes that is intended, data minimization, and of course the data must be kept secure. These principles do still apply even if AI is being used. So this then leads us on to a number of questions which you need to consider. Will this AI tool be processing special category data? Special category data obviously includes, but is not limited to, biometric data, health data, racial or ethnic origin, amongst others. So, for example, if a member of staff discloses to you that they have a disability, provides you with a medical report outlining their health conditions, that will contain special category data. Therefore, that needs to be protected, and it should be anyway. How will that then be adopted and used by an AI tool? Then also need to consider, will this AI tool be undertaking profiling? Will it be making solely automated decision making? Now, as standard, your data protection policies should say if automated decision making is something that is undertaken, and if it is not undertaken, then it should state that as well. It should therefore mean that if there is any automated decision making that is being used by artificial intelligence, it should be clear on that fact as well. Is a data protection impact assessment required? Generally, I would always err on the side of caution. Having assessments, having risk assessments, anything of that nature, it is always better to be safe. What information security measures will be put in place to protect personal data? Using this example, if there is an AI tool that has collected biometric data of a member of staff, what will you do as an employer to ensure that that information is kept confidential? How will that be maintained within your servers and within your intranet? Is there additional safeguards? Do you need additional passwords? These are all important questions that you would want to be asking of your IT security team, your data protection officer, and if in doubt, the Information Commissioner's Office may be able to assist. Also, you then also need to consider how will your individual data subject rights be complied with. So obviously those of you who are more versed in data protection will be aware, obviously, data subjects have a number of rights. They have a right to have their data erased. They have a right to see what personal data you hold on them. They have a right to have their data rectified if there are any mistakes in that data. How does that all fit in if you're using AI tools? All very important food for thought. Now, neither myself nor Ashley are intellectual property advisors, but we would be remiss to not mention the issues of IP and trademarks. So, usage of client materials in AI tools could very much be classed as an infringement on intellectual property. Putting branded logos into ChatGPT could cause a whole host of problems, as well as using materials that are already considered to be owned by another person. There's also, if you use generative AI, a delightful and somewhat philosophical question of who actually has ownership of the AI-generated content. Is it the employer, because it's a software tool deployed by the employer? Is it the employee who has put the prompts into the generative tool to create the content? Or, somewhat strangely, is it the actual tool itself or the software? These are not questions that I am able to answer for the purpose of this seminar. However, I would suggest checking any licensing or software agreements that you have when you obtain your AI tools, and if in doubt, these are conversations to have with your IT security team. Now, confidentiality, one of the key issues that has arisen with the publicly available AI tools is people putting confidential information into said tools. Obviously, something like ChatGPT should never have client personal information, such as addresses, contact details, email addresses inputted into it. So if you are advising your staff that if they need a hand in writing an email, they're allowed to use ChatGPT, you should make it abundantly clear to your staff, and this is something that would be covered off in your generative AI policy, that confidential information should never, ever be input into public AI tools, because who will know when, how, or where that data can be accessed, stored, and reused, especially something that is used on a global scale like ChatGPT. Now, a resolution to this, as I explain later in this slide, is that have a section of the policy making clear that any confidential, sensitive, or proprietary employer or third-party data never to be entered into the application as a prompt. I believe you would be well within your rights as an employer to make it a gross misconduct offence for misuse and mishandling of personal data. But again, this depends on the circumstances, the data disclosed, and the full situation at hand. So what is the one conclusion that we can draw this to? So artificial intelligence tools are only as good as the information provided to them. And they are data-driven. This is a very growing industry. And whilst this is interesting and clearly has a lot of benefits, it is still very early days in terms of where we are in terms of the development of the technologies. If you are interested in using AI to assist your business, you need to be aware of the risks that come with using it as well as the benefits. I hate to be a pessimist, though unfortunately my line of work often means that I have to be, but you need to be considering how it could help you streamline your business, but also what potential cost and risks come with doing that as well. So if you are considering in getting AI tools involved, an ideal starting point would be determining what tasks you could use it for. If you do intend to use generative AI, then a suitable policy should be put in place. So Applications like ChatGPT, if you intend to use it, should be referred to within that policy, and there should be detailed guidelines on how and when it is to be used, as well as your right to monitor staff's usage of the same. If you also intend to have staff using AI as part of their day-to-day duties, then implementing a code of conduct with your value statement is an ideal document to have in place. I'm going to take a short pause for a moment, see if anyone has any questions for us. So we'll skip about 3 minutes. Do submit any questions you might have in the chat box, and we will come back to you when we can. Okay, so rather than questions, we had a couple of comments come through as to if there is any other wide-ranging issues of artificial intelligence and any other issues that we should be mindful of. Now, there are a number of issues, though these are not necessarily UK based, in which AI has been used to make decisions as to whether people should be used under their health insurance plans. Again, if you're all predominantly UK-based employers and don't have American counterparts, this is unlikely to be a problem that you will face. However, it is mindful, this is again to consider when you're wanting to use those tools, and if there are any examples in which you want to ensure, you're making decisions to whether somebody should be given coverage under a health insurance policy, or whether somebody's employment should be terminated. These are decisions that should not be taken lightly. There are a number of documentaries that cover the same. There is a particular broadcast at the moment from Hannah Fry that discusses this in great detail. But if you are interested in following any updates on AI, we would suggest, keep yourself aware as to the developments that are ongoing, and speak with any of your software providers and your IT security team if you want any further information. If you have any legal questions or questions about the implications for human resources and how that might impact your business, myself and Ashley will be available for any questions that you might have. Thank you very much for coming to see us both.
Thank you very much.
And enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you.
Bye.